8 years after their last gathering, EU leaders and leaders from the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, meet in Brussels for the third EU-CELAC summit. Ukraine is not a part of both organizations, but the participants discussed the topic of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its negative influence on world trade, the economy and stability. The main issue for the participants was a paragraph about Ukraine in the final declaration of the summit.
The fact is that Russia aggressed Ukraine. It's a fact, and we cannot say now that it's an Ukrainian war. I think this is not the reality, so we have to face the reality. If most of the countries except the 3 or 4 do not agree, we still can have a remark to say that nearly all the countries except that do not agree. But it would be a shame that we are not able to say that there is Russian aggression in Ukraine. It's a fact.
The discussion was so active that the final press conference started several hours after the time it was announced. The representatives of the EU were satisfied with the results of the summit.
We have just agreed on a declaration on both sides, an ambitious declaration that covers a vast scope of areas for future development. This was supported by all countries with the exception of one that couldn't agree to one single paragraph. So that was the success of this event.
Ukraine was not the only topic at the summit. The Russian invasion of Ukraine destroyed traditional chains of international trade and made the world a more insecure place.
We are all concerned about the situation of war in Ukraine. Quite clearly, we are concerned. And the countries of Latin America have always expressed their desire to work to recover peace quickly, and that should be enduring peace. And we still say today that war is not the way.
The issue connected with green transition, climate changes and pandemics were discussed as well.
We launched the Global Gateway Investment Agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean. We will bring over 45 billion euro of high-quality European investment to Latin America and the Caribbean. More than 135 projects are already in the pipeline, so it's a very good start.
And I'm also happy because this was the first time that we had the opportunity to discuss in such clear terms a mechanism that would take us away from extractivism in Latin America. This whole idea that Latin America is just a producer of raw materials.
The participants of the summit condemned the war against Ukraine and supported the efforts to establish a just peace for Ukraine.
We discussed a lot, of course, the fact that everybody wants this war to end. And peace needs to be just and enduring, and it needs to be centered. And the core has to be the UN Charter.
It was hard to find suitable formula to describe the Russian aggression against Ukraine in the final statement. That is why participants decided to refer to their voting in the United Nations Assembly for the resolution which condemned the aggression against Ukraine.
The principles involved. You express the concern about this matter, you express the difficulties which exist, you deal with the issue of peace. And then it recites in the paragraph the resolutions, the references to the resolutions at the United Nations. And those resolutions spoke to the question of aggression by Russia. A declaration is not a PhD thesis.
The vast majority of Latin America countries condemn Russian aggression against Ukraine, but there is still significant Russian propaganda influence in the region.
Well, I think what Ukraine has got to do is acknowledge that these Latin American viewpoints are serious, they are grounded, they are rational, they come from a deep understanding of Latin American history, but at the same time there are really serious weaknesses in the Latin American point of view. I think one of them is the issue which is worrying in the way the Latin Americans see Ukraine, is they're starting to believe that both the West and Russia are to be blamed for the escalation in fighting and the rise in the amount of military equipment which is being used in Ukraine. And they don't seem to recognize, as they should, that Ukraine is obviously fighting a defensive war against an invader, and I think that issue has to be made very clear. I think it has to be made very clear what the nature of the sanctions are which are being applied against Russia. It has to be made very clear that the sanctions will end when the invasion ends and when a peaceful settlement with Ukraine's approval is reached.
Vitalii Syzov, Ruslan Kuzgov from Brussels for UATV channel.